Hey folks, it's exciting to see everybody here. So as mentioned, I work at Google and I've been working on web performance for the past couple of years. And this journey took me through a lot of different areas in web standards, internet standards, and all the way from working on radio towers up to the browser. And today I actually want to talk about some of my own experiences and reflections on why do we care about the web and what are we doing about it at Google. So at the risk of stating the obvious, Google loves web. And I don't say this just because we have a whole lot of products that are incredibly successful on the web, but also because we fundamentally believe that the set of principles around which the web is built has created a platform that has become what is arguably the most successful platform to date for reaching users and developers alike. And some of the key principles that I think are at the root of success of the web are the 5 that I laid out here. The web is secure, it is linkable, it is indexable, it is composable, which is important to us as developers, and also ephemerable, which is an often overlooked and important criteria. So let's actually take a closer look at what these mean. So first of all, linkable. Arguably, this is the superpower of the web. This is the best user experience you can offer across any platform. Any answer is just a click away. You don't need to install anything. You don't have to worry about anything. You can click and immediately get your answer. It may be an answer from an encyclopedia. It may be streaming a movie or maybe placing an order. There's no friction for the user, which is why the web has been historically so successful. Also, it is indexable. Because this content is built on links and the vast majority of it is public, it also means that we can build additional services on top that can go out and find this content on the web, index it, and make it approachable. So of course, that's what we do at Google. Google Search has enabled us to have instant access to billions of pages on the web in an instant. And that is a remarkable achievement if you think about it. Just the fact that we can type in a query into a search box and a couple hundred milliseconds later get instant answers to any questions that you have is an amazing superpower that we have that 30 years ago might have been thought as unthinkable. For us as developers, the web is also composable. And it may not seem all that interesting or magical, but if you think about it, you can add a small snippet, less than 10 lines of code, with an iframe and have a fully interactive map on your page. This takes you virtually no time, and all of a sudden you have a full application running in your browser. Now, 10 years ago, we didn't even think that you can click on something and drag something around. And yet today, we have a fully interactive map experience that is right there and embedded on your page. So composability is a key asset of the web. Now, the other important factor of it is when you actually do embed something on your page, it is isolated. So it's also secure. So in this case, we're iframing a set of content. And in fact, if you pay attention in the background, when I embed a map, the map actually knows that I'm logged in on Google Maps and gives me personalized recommendations, even though the map may be presented on your own site. And there is a strong isolation between these origins, which allows the map to be protected from the parent page from the embedder and vice versa. And this is a key component of the web. And last, as I hinted earlier, that is often overlooked is the fact that the web is ephemerable. There are no uninstall buttons. Just as it's easy to click on a link, you can hit back button or close the tab, and you navigate away. You never have to worry about what are the things that you have to install, uninstall. You never have to think about managing disk space or other funny things when you're navigating the web. It just all happens for you. And these 5 components are the key to success of the web, right? And we can all give ourselves a self-congratulatory pat on the back for inventing this amazing platform and being the stewards of it. And that's great, except then one day you open the news on Sunday and you see this article land in your inbox. And I should actually pause and say it is a popular sport to declare that the web is dead or about to die virtually on a daily basis. But this article actually stirred quite the controversy, and this is from back in 2010. And this was written by Chris Anderson, who at the time actually had a very strong and sound argument for the case that he was making. And specifically, he observed that in the past few years preceding 2010, there was a new platform that was emerging. Specifically, it was the iPhone. And the iPhone brought us the mobile experience and the mobile web, amongst other things. And the claim that he made was that, you know what? Browsing the web on a mobile device in 2010 was actually not a very good experience. If we want to be frank, it was actually pretty miserable. If you recall what that was like, you would open a page, it would be this tiny little text that you can't quite see. You'd then have to either double tap or pinch zoom and navigate around and then miss the link and click on the other link, and it was basically a user experience disaster. And Chris observed, correctly so, that there's a better class of experiences emerging, which is native apps, which allow you to have more interesting experiences faster. And you know what? This is a closed platform. So the tenets that we just described, the open, the links, and other things, were going away. So hence, the web is dead. Also, if you look at the stats, he made this argument in 2010, and he completely nailed and got the prediction correct in terms of the inflection point in mobile usage. If you look forward, project that 5 years forward, the mobile usage has now eclipsed desktop usage on the web. And in fact, this is public data from StatCounter. From within Google Search, we saw this trend even sooner, and this happened even earlier for us. So he correctly anticipated all the problems. But then what happened? The web is still here. It turns out that the web actually had all the key components right from the beginning. The early HTML standard actually considered different output mediums. It's just that we kind of neglected most of these capabilities over the years. And then it took us a couple of years and a lot of standards work and a lot of engineering to put those building blocks back together to figure out how we can rebuild the web. And of course, we're all still here and we're still talking about the web, so the transition has been mostly successful. In fact, when we were looking at this at Google, we noticed that the websites were transitioning to mobile-friendly experiences, but frankly, they were not doing it fast enough. The problem that we saw was that a lot of users were making searches at Google Search, and they were doing it on a mobile device, and the most relevant results were desktop-only content. So we were sending users towards suboptimal user experiences. And guess what? Users were clicking back because they were unsatisfied with those answers. Even if the content was correct, the experience didn't actually match what they wanted to experience. So that was a disconnect. So we said, OK, well, we can factor that in. So we poured over all of our docs, crafted tools, tried to make it as approachable and easy as possible, and made the announcement that going forward, mobile friendliness will be a signal in Google Search. Of course, the SEO community had a different spin on it and decided to call it the Mobilegeddon, right? It's all about marketing. We didn't get our marketing right. But while this is definitely over the top, I think it does underscore an important point. This was a ginormous inflection for the web. We effectively had to rebuild the web from the ground up because we designed it to be desktop only, to be mobile friendly. And next thing we know, we have, let's see, we're going backwards and forwards. Next thing we know, we have media coverage on Mobilegeddon, how it's going to hurt our small businesses. And it was kind of a tough spot for the web. It was a day of the reckoning that was coming. But then you know what? Mobile-friendly web happened. When was the last time that you experienced browsing the web on your mobile phone where you had to pinch zoom? I mean, it still happens occasionally, but it's pretty rare, right? So for the most part, we did it. And lo and behold, in 2016, Wired publishes an article like, OK, maybe we kind of overdid it. It's fine. It's not dead. And it was a hard change, but we did it. I would have one exception to this article, and I would say it's not Google, it was Team Web. It's certainly true that there's a lot of people within Google that did a lot of work, both on the standards and on the browser work and in all other aspects within Google Search to help make that transition. But equally many, if not even more so, it's all the people in the community that have made the change. And fundamentally, actually, it's you guys that have rebuilt your websites to be mobile-friendly. So kudos to you, right? We did it. So once again, we rescued the web. Good times, 2016, right? So there's a cycle here. We keep reinventing the web. Except, literally 3 days after they published that the mobile web is not dead, Wired's back at the drawing board saying, like, you know what? Yeah, fine, you're mobile-friendly, but you're kind of getting a little large around the waist. The web's kind of slow, it's kind of kludgy. Our apps feel a little bit faster. And in fact, Forbes shared the same opinion, so that there was a zeitgeist circulating that, in fact, the web is maybe not meeting the expectations of the users anymore, and we really need to rethink it. And one of the ideas there, or one of the observations rather, was that perhaps the key asset of the web, the fact that it's composable and allows us to put all of these things on your page very quickly, is also what's drawing us into this problem, because it's just too easy to put too many things on a page. You put one too many ads, one too many images, one too many videos, and all of a sudden the page is kind of slow. So that's not great. And I think we've all experienced this, right? The pages are loading slow. They're taking a while to render any content on the screen. There's also cases where we're just executing a lot of content, a lot of JavaScript, and because of that, even though the page is rendered, when you try to interact with it, you can't actually do anything with the content, which feels very frustrating. And then finally, perhaps one of the most annoying experiences is when you're trying to read and the content is shifting because some image or some other asset is loading above it and shifting the layout of the entire page, which is an incredibly infuriating experience when you're trying to just like read a single paragraph of text. All of these are fixable problems, but they are side effects of the primitives that we built on the web. Further, we said that ephemeral nature of the web is very important, the fact that you can just click on the link and land exactly where you want. But you know what? Similarly, it's just as easy to click back and never come back. And it turns out that many apps solve this problem in a different way, right? It's once you convince the user to get on the home screen, you are on the home screen. And that's a reminder for the user to come back. And further, once you're there, you can get notifications. You have other re-engagement channels and that would allow you to pull the user back in. And that was the tension that many of the Tier 1 apps were struggling with. They wanted to re-engage users on the web. So once again, a key strength becomes arguably a key weakness, or a key weakness. So there's always problems. There's always downsides that are being highlighted. And over the course of the last couple of years, we've, of course, been working on progressive web apps. So progressive web apps is an umbrella term for a set of technologies that bring a lot of new capabilities to the web. Everything from caching to offline support to notifications to add to home screen, everything all in one. So let's talk about some examples. So Starbucks recently relaunched their iOS app, or rather they scrapped their iOS app and decided to rebuild it as a website. And instead of forcing the user to download a 150 megabyte app to order a coffee, they found that by making it an instant click to order on the web, the user engagement went up, there's more orders, and actually what's impressed them even more is the fact that they've also been able to engage the desktop users because the web is accessible on desktop. They built a responsive website, it worked, they got better engagement on mobile, and they unlocked an entirely new market on desktop for their store. Forbes is another good example. So this is a content-forward experience. They focused on performance. So they rebuilt their app using these new technologies, and they focused on improving time to first paint and also interactivity metrics. And what they found was that once they removed a lot of the unnecessary content and a lot of third-party content, the users that were already engaged with their content, or already users of their content, consumers of their content, started spending more time with their content. They were literally scrolling deeper into the articles. Further, they were reading more articles because it was just, I guess, more pleasant. And ultimately, it also allowed them to get this experience onto the home screen and get that re-engagement channel for here's a breaking story or here's the topic that you are interested in. Finally, e-commerce, another pillar of the web. Similar to all the other experiences that I highlighted, the team here focused on improving performance. So they relaunched their app as a web app and increased or improved the time to interactive and bounce rate. And what they found was that this drove a 50% increase in mobile sessions compared to their app experience, and also a huge increase in conversions. And for a site like Lancome, which is a big retailer, this is, of course, a huge, huge win. So the key message that I'm trying to drive at here through these examples is that the web is actually always changing. It's always reinventing itself. And there's a number of these shifts always in progress. And sometimes
Sometimes the temperature up at altitude will reach 60 below. It's brisk, it's refreshing.
You never know what you're going to come across up here. Alien geese, mallards.
Owls. These people back here, that's why I come to work. That's why I build airplanes in the sky.
We're not just building a plane here. We're building a dream.
I love this job.
That's kind of how it feels to work on the web platform sometimes. You have this plane, it's this giant machine that's mid-flight, and you're trying to rebuild it as new things come up. And that is, in fact, the joy of working on this platform. And as I mentioned, there's many transformations underway. I focused a lot on mobile web. This just is one illustrative example. But we can talk and spend hours across many other vectors. For example, we're changing from a static web to a dynamic web. Some sites that you visit today have nearly zero actual HTML when you actually look at the source. They're primarily powered by JavaScript. And this has interesting implications, both for the performance, also the indexing and accessibility and all the other aspects. Text web, making the transition to media web is a fascinating one, because we're finding that in some regions of the world, people are actually more willing to consume video content than they're willing to consume text content, and also produce video content, because it's just easier. You don't have to be literate to produce a video. You don't have to be literate to read, or to read text content. You can watch a video. So in some places, video is actually the primary way to consume content, which also has interesting implications for how do we deliver video, how do we change the platform to make it more efficient, and how do we make that content accessible on the web as well. And finally, plain text web to secure web, which we'll come back to in a little bit. So we've been focused a lot on the past. I don't want to now shift and talk a little bit about what's coming in both in the short term and longer term. So one of the things that I hinted at before is Google search actually factors in whether a mobile site or a site is mobile friendly. Now, there's an interesting caveat to that. Being mobile friendly doesn't mean that we indexed your mobile content. So starting this year, we're actually changing how we crawl the web to present ourselves. So the Google crawler will present itself as a mobile user agent, which means that when we come and visit your site, we will index the content that is displayed on your mobile page. Why is that important? Well, it turns out that one of the side effects of the previous way we were doing indexing is we would crawl the desktop site, but then a lot of the users would come on a mobile experience, and sometimes the content would not be one-to-one, right? So you'd think that the content is there, but there's a mismatch. So we're fixing that, and of course that means that if you have a mobile experience, you really need to make sure that you have all the right content on your mobile experience. It's no longer sufficient to somehow force the user into a desktop experience if they need to have additional content. Further, I think one trend that is underplayed and does not get enough attention right now today is mobile-only usage. We've made the transition to mobile-friendly. We're talking about mobile first, but it turns out that if you look at the number of people who are smartphone-dependent, specifically people that only access the web on smartphone, that number is increasing rapidly. So the data that I have here is from Pew Research. This is for US, and this is public data. And if you look at the numbers, for example, in the age range of 18 to 29, in 2016, there were 17% of users in the US that are smartphone dependent. They don't have access to a tablet or a desktop PC. They cannot experience your website on those form factors. So that means that if you're relying on that user being able to complete their transaction or do something more advanced on that form factor, they will not be able to do so. So I think this is something that we'll have to wrangle with in the coming future. And this data is for US, and we see numbers that are much higher in some other regions, perhaps not surprisingly. Speed is another big vector. Of course, we mentioned it before, and we continue doing improvement. But once again, we're starting to factor in speed into our ranking to give incentives into the ecosystem to make sure that we're all building fast experiences. And of course, this is a topic near and dear to my heart. There isn't any one specific metric or way to measure the speed, but ultimately what we care about is the end user experience. And one of the tools in our arsenal that we now have is that last year, the Chrome team have published a new data set, a new resource, which is a Chrome User Experience Report. And the way this works is that Chrome collects anonymized performance data as you browse the web, and that data is made public and available for all the top sites on the web, which means that you can analyze your own site as well as your competitor sites. And it can be used in other contexts as well. So this is very important moving forward, and we're definitely going to be, you're going to be hearing a lot more about this in the future. One way to look at this data is actually to open PageSpeed Insights. So if you just search for PageSpeed Insights, you can type in any URL, and now we will show you two things on that page. There's the speed and the optimization scores. In this case, I'm actually pulling up our conference website, and you can see that the optimization says that there's some room for improvement here. There's probably some images that are not fully optimized. But the speed is the part that's coming from the real-world user data as captured by Chrome. This shows you how the real-world users are experiencing this website. So in this particular case, if we zoom in on that little bar chart at the top, it actually tells you that the first contentful paint, or FCP, about 20% of the users experience the first contentful paint under 1.6 seconds. Which is not bad. But if you look at the actual distribution, majority of the users, 55%, are in 1.6 to 3 seconds, which is somewhat surprising, right? Because you'd expect that the audience that accesses this website is probably accessing on fairly modern hardware, on fairly fast networks. So even so, there's room for improvement here. And we want to drive this number down to improve the end user experience on the web. So definitely a tool that you should check out and learn more about the Chrome User Experience Report. Finally, let's talk about Chrome. So Chrome is available on all platforms: Linux, iOS, macOS, Windows, Chrome OS, of course, and has well over 1 billion users. So any incremental changes that we make in Chrome have enormous impact on the web. And it's been an amazing experience for me to work with the Chrome engineering team in that regard. So one example that I want to highlight from last year, which is a good example of collaboration across different vendors, is work that the V8 team did with the Safari team. So it turns out that a lot of the JavaScript benchmarks that you tend to run tend to focus on micro-optimizations. And as JavaScript engineers, we can geek out on how to optimize arrays and do all kinds of crazy fun stuff. But in many cases, those things don't translate to a better end-user experience when we actually try to execute real-world apps, because it's not just about arrays, it's about a whole host of other APIs. So this benchmark was built around capturing the real-world execution of real apps. And over the course of the past year, once we had this benchmark, we've been able to improve the actual experience by 25 to 35%, which is quite remarkable, because it means that the web just got faster by about 30% over the course of last year. Similarly, actually, just now in Chrome 66, we landed another really big optimization, which is background compilation. So I hinted at this before. One of the big changes that's happening on the web right now is a transition from a static web to dynamic web, which means that there is oodles and oodles of JavaScript that we're executing on every page load. And one of the challenges with executing all that JavaScript is first you have to download it, which takes quite a bit of time. Then you have to parse it. Then you have to compile it. Then you have to run it. And those three steps, we can spend a lot of time about the network, but it turns out that the parse and compile steps actually take a significant amount of time, especially when you're loading a page and you're executing all your framework code. And while that's happening, the main thread that does the rendering is actually blocked, which prevents us from interacting with the page. You can't scroll, or actually in some browsers you can scroll, but you can't click and do other things that you want the user to be able to do. So the big change that's happening now here is that we're actually moving the parse and compile steps onto a separate thread, which unlocks the rendering and other interactivity from happening on the main thread. So this just launched. I'm really excited about it, and it's definitely having a huge impact on performance on the web. If you look at the actual real-world performance or real-world impact of this change, we have some apps that are incredibly JavaScript heavy, like, for example, Google Maps. And this change alone improves the startup time of Google Maps by about 30%. So nice wins there. Another feature that I think many people don't know about in Chrome is the data saver feature. So for us, this may not be a big deal because we have unlimited data plans and fast networks, and we don't tend to think about micro-optimizing for how many megabytes each page consumes. But in many places in the world, access to the internet consumes a large portion of the GDP and the cost. And Data Saver is a feature which proxies content through Google servers and optimizes it on the fly. So if you're accessing a web page, specifically an HTTP web page, we will proxy that content, compress images, and do other optimizations to reduce the actual payload size. And there's well over 100 million users for this, and we're saving about 120 terabytes of data per day, which is quite astounding. Finally, it's not all about bytes. This is a really fun example. I was having a chat with one of our Chrome engineers, and he shared a fun thing with me. It's like, I'm working on autofill, and if you actually look at the data, autofill saves about 500 billion characters per month. If you assume that the average typing speed of a human is 30 words per minute, we're saving about 190,000 years per month in human lifetimes, which just blew my mind. It's like, that is the power of the web, right? We have that, it's the reach of the web and the number of users on the web that leads to these sorts of figures. So small things like working on autofill can have huge impact on the usability and performance of the web and the user experience on the web. Finally, there is security. If you haven't noticed, there's a big shift and trend in the web ecosystem towards moving the web towards secure first and securing the web. Over the course of just the last year, we've improved HTTPS browsing by about 20%. So nearly 70 to 75% of sessions in Chrome today are now HTTPS only, which is a huge change compared to just 3 years ago when it was hovering around 30%. So this took a lot of doing and a lot of community work. For example, Let's Encrypt has been a pivotal pillar of this initiative, which enabled free certificates for the web, and they are now the largest provider. And actually, more recently, or just last week, I was really excited to see this, where at Google I/O we launched the new .app TLD. So this is a public TLD. You can go register your own .app domain. But the really cool thing about it is that it's actually HTTPS only. So by default, it is baked into the browser that any access to .app will be over SSL, or over TLS, I should say. And that is really, really good for the web, for the long-term success of the web. And I'm hoping that more registrars will follow this lead as well. Finally, we're also going to give a few nudges to the ecosystem to help it migrate towards secure web. So as of July later this year, in the info bar of your URL, we will start showing not secure banner for any site that you access or any site that the user accesses that is not over HTTPS. And we make no secrets about our actual end goal and intention towards getting this red lock whenever you access non-secure websites. This has been a 5-year-plus plan all along, and we're slowly getting there. We don't know the date for when this will go into effect because we don't want to freak out people, and we want to make sure that the web is ready for this transition. But this is another transformational change for the web, where we've gone from just a few sites being accessible over HTTPS to nearly all those sites appearing over HTTPS. And this is not important just because of security. It's also the pillar and the keystone of being able to get access to all the modern web features. Things like service worker, push notifications, and all these other capabilities are only available over HTTPS because of the immense power that it actually gives to the user, and that we don't want to allow to fall into the wrong hands. So this is all great, but what's a little bit further out? What's more interesting, right? Because, Ilya, this is all great, push notifications, offline. I had that on my native app 10 years ago, but web still can't do real work. I'm a developer. You can't do an IDE on the web, right? And whenever I have the conversation, I like to point them to the doc, and we can just scroll through the bottom and say, well, you're right, because Slack is just a web app wrapped with an Electron shell, and Spotify is actually a web app wrapped in a Chromium shell. In fact, even the App Store is effectively a web app wrapped in a WebKit. So a lot of the applications that we use today are actually powered by web technology. In fact, the Visual Studio Code is a web app that also happens to be wrapped in Electron, which is powered by Chromium. And it doesn't have to be powered by Chromium. It can be powered by any web rendering engine. It just, in this case, happens to be Chromium. So the real question is not why can't we build these apps? It's just, why do we make it so damn hard? And we're fixing that problem too. So if you watched Google I/O last week, we made a number of exciting announcements in this space. First of all, desktop apps, desktop PWAs are coming to Chrome OS, or they're already available in Chrome OS. So for example, if you go to Starbucks, the experience that we talked about earlier on your Chrome laptop, or Chrome OS laptop, you can actually take that experience and make it feel like a native app on Chrome OS. It'll have an icon just like any other app. You can Alt-Tab. It's a separate window. You have push notifications. It feels and smells just like any other app. And we're also bringing this experience later this year to macOS, Windows, and Linux as well. So you'll be able to take that web experience and bring it directly to your desktop and bring the power of the web to the desktop experience, which, of course, is going to be a huge win and differentiator for the web as compared to other platforms. Further, WebAssembly is going to make quite a few changes and really interesting impact on the web. So this is not the first attempt to bring native codes to the web. There's been a number. But this is the first time where we have all the browser vendors aligned, and this is, in fact, already available across all the browser engines. So you can take your C, C++, or Rust code, compile it, and run it directly in the browser. And Hello World may not seem like a terribly compelling reason for why you might want to do that, but take something like AutoCAD. AutoCAD is an application that was born before the web came to be. This code base has been developed for the last 30 years. And the team at AutoCAD has actually tried to bring some of this experience to the web before. They've attempted in Flash, but then Flash died. They tried to rebuild some of the core engine in JavaScript and just realized that there's no way we're going to be able to achieve that. We have giant teams of people working on the C++ code base. We're not going to be able to replicate this in JavaScript in parallel. So they abandoned that. And then when WebAssembly came, they were able to take their C++ code base and literally compile it against the web and run it directly in a browser. So the web experience of Autodesk is a fully featured editor that is leveraging their C++, like 3 decades of C++ development. And of course, there's lots and lots more to talk about here. I could spend hours on it. Instead, I will encourage you to check out the playlist from Google I/O last week. In particular, one good place to start is the State of the Union, which gives you the full breadth of what is coming to the web. And with that, I think we'll go to questions. Yay.
That was good. Right, so I have a chance to actually ask some questions today.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sending your questions in. So, first question, do you think PWAs are the future standard, beating both classic web apps and native apps?
That's a fun question. PWAs is not a single standard. It is a combination of many and confluence of many technologies that come together, and it's really up to any given application to pick which parts of it make sense. So it is the next iteration on what you would consider, I guess, to be the classic web. Classic web is kind of an interesting definition on its own. I think the way I would distinguish it is focus on the progressive part. Right? You have a web experience they can make more resilient by adding service worker, more engaging by adding push notifications and re-engagement and other things. And native apps have their place. The web is built around the set of key principles that we explored at the beginning that I think give it an edge in the accessibility and the reach, and that's where I would focus.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, next question, quite like this one, got to be honest. Okay, so how can we stop the JavaScript people from trying to break the web? I love it, the JavaScript people.
So first of all, I love the JavaScript people. Let's be clear.
They live on an island somewhere, it seems.
Yes, we should just put them all on one single island. So I think this is a really interesting conversation that is happening in the community right now. One of the things that we're observing is, yes, we've been able to land some platform improvements, things like moving the compilation onto different thread and kind of rejiggering some of the engine internals. But fundamentally, we're seeing a huge increase in the amount of JavaScript that we need to execute. And that goes against a lot of the performance goals that we want for the web. So I think there's a lot of interesting discussions happening right now about how do we set budgets? How do we monitor budgets? How do we enforce budgets? So for example, if you build a fast experience and then you add a third-party library or a dependency and it brings megabytes of JavaScript, can you control that? The answer today is no, but perhaps there should be. So there's some interesting explorations happening right now around concepts like feature policy, where you'll be able to disable certain features in certain code paths to say, like, I know that synchronous XHR is bad, I want to disable it on my site, and I want to enforce this policy on all of my embedders, such that they can't just kill my performance. Similarly, there's interesting conversations about size policy, where you'll be able to set constraints on how much JavaScript you're allowed to execute or bring in, and then enforce that on your third parties as well. So I think that's more of a policy argument, and then I think there's just a question of tooling. So there's a lot of interesting work happening in the JavaScript community about how do we do incremental loading instead of downloading the entire app or all the JavaScript up front. How do we break it up into smaller components so it's more progressive? So I think it's going to be a combination of a lot of different things that come together, but it's definitely probably the biggest challenge that we have moving forward for performance.
Great, okay. JavaScript people, beware. So, what do you think about WebSockets and its future in the web?
WebSockets have been instrumental to a lot of different applications. They've enabled a lot of the real-time collaboration that we experience on the web today. There was a period where WebSockets, so we developed HTTP2, which was a huge performance improvement and a win for the web, but there was no way to map WebSockets onto HTTP2. And that's being fixed now, so I think that'll be interesting to watch. There's some challenges with using WebSockets in terms of running them at scale. Certainly something that we fought with at Google. And it's a core technology. It will continue to exist, and I'm not sure that there's anything that needs to really change there.
Okay. Next question. So, what role will blockchain play in the future of the web? Another future of the web question.
Right. It's not a developer conference unless you mention blockchain. I don't know. It's a really good question. I think there's some interesting opportunities here in terms of identity, maybe some of the integration with payments. In fact, there is payment request API. It can interoperate with other payment methods using any cryptocurrency that you like. So I think this is still an unanswered question, and we will see. I mean, the blockchain community is doing some really interesting innovation where they've actually forked some browsers or built extensions for browsers that add like a new layer of capabilities onto the web that are powered by blockchain. But I think it's still very much very early and in an inception phase, so we'll have to see where it goes.
Okay, great. So, if WPA is the future, why Flutter?
Why Flutter? That's a good question. So Flutter is another technology that's being developed at Google that allows you to build apps that run across different runtimes. So it is iOS, Android, and other runtimes. And why do we need Flutter? Personally, I think the web is more than sufficient. But to be more honest about it, I think Flutter is doing some really interesting work in their rendering engine and in performance. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from Flutter in that regard.
Okay, so we can see we have some jokers in the room. As we can
You guys
go.
are hard, man.
But you know what? We're going to take you on, and Ilya can decide whether he answers the question or not. So you want to know
How to stop people using Internet Explorer. I think that's a question for the Microsoft booth.
I agree.
But I have to say, if you guys have not tried the new Edge browser, it is really good. It is very fast, and it has some really interesting stuff in there. So we've been able to do some really good work with that team. And of course, I spent a lot of time talking about the mobile web, but the desktop web is not going away. And we really need to do a lot of work there. So Internet Explorer, the old iteration, yes, I would like to kill it with fire. The new Edge browser is excellent.
How did Internet Explorer die? Ilya burnt it. OK, so this is a bit of a personal question, so you can decide. In fact, you can decide which part of the question you're willing to answer.
OK.
So how many native apps do you have installed on your phone, and why?
How many? I have no idea. Probably too many. I probably have 10 browsers installed. Don't ask me why. But I guess it's my job to test them all.
I suppose the question is, how many of them do you actually use of those browsers?
Funny enough, I use many of them all the time.
OK. OK, great. So quick question to the audience. So how many people think they know how many apps they've got on their phone?
1.
Wow, and it's 2. 2. No, 3, 4, 5. 5 of you. There's a lot of you in this room. That's really interesting.
So here's another interesting follow-up. How many people have the Twitter app installed? OK, a lot more.
Do you
No.
Oh, go ahead.
And how many of you have tried the Twitter PWA app? A lot fewer hands. I challenge you to try the Twitter PWA app. So load up Chrome, go to mobile.twitter.com, and log in and try it. You can add it to home screen, and you'll be using a PWA.
Look at that. Check you out. Get on it. Come on. Right, so last question, as our time is running out. So I always have to decipher questions before I can actually ask them. So I'm going to read it as it is, because I'm not sure I can decipher it. So, how Google index pages which run only on JavaScript on a client side. Did you get that?
I think so.
OK.
So there's a long answer, which is we just had an hour-long session on Google I/O that goes in-depth on how we actually do this. But the short answer is we actually use Chrome inside of our search infrastructure to render pages. So we download all the content. We pass it to the web rendering service, which is actually powered by Chrome. Now, one caveat to that is it's actually running a fairly old version of Chrome. I believe M41, which is about 3 years old, but we're working on getting that updated to a new version. So the answer to this question is we execute JavaScript using Chrome. We index the content after that's all executed. So there's some gotchas that you need to be aware of there in terms of if you're using, for example, the latest ES6 syntax, unfortunately, the old Chrome doesn't understand it. So if you have your arrow function, it'll just kind of explode and say, oh, it's a syntax error, and your app may not work. So definitely recommend that you watch that session because you, of course, want your site to be discoverable on search.
Great. Thank you so much. So the operative word for that question that is missing is do. Just wanted to share that. Makes the whole thing make sense. Right. So, Ilya, thank you so much for being here. It's been wonderful having you.